But we almost definitely have 5. So Coda's been in our family as a foster child long enough that we think he's going to become a permanent member of our family, being adopted this summer. But we now have 2 little girls who are also in the foster system, and if they end up in our family permanently, their 5 siblings may come as well. So I either have 4 grandchildren, or 5, or 7, or 12. And still kids at home, and so people are expecting me there. So thank you to everybody who bought a book. There's one still back there on the table, and I have one here, and I don't really need to take any of them home. So if there's somebody that still wants a book, please feel free to get one before I leave. There's ministry information back there in these. Please grab one of these. It has my email address in the very back, which is like, the cost of the free brochure. My email address is also on the bottom of this sheet of paper. If you took notes on your little sheet of paper, my email address is down there. So anything that you think you missed or want to talk more about, just feel free to email. Okay, here's what we're going to do in this limited time that we have together, and I promise you we will all be out the door, and everyone will have gotten to ask their questions and do some sharing, and we will do a sending prayer at the end, because I was reminded by one small group that we didn't talk about. Tell us what we didn't talk about in terms of ambassadors.
Commissioning them.
We didn't talk about the fact that ambassadors are actually commissioned by the king. They're commissioned by the kingdom that sends them. They are equipped by that kingdom. They are empowered by that kingdom. And so we want to be sure that we do that as we go forward as ambassadors of Jesus Christ into the world today. Good? So that's where we're headed. This section is highly participatory. So, and the answer to every question is not Jesus.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Ultimately, the answer to every question is Jesus, but sometimes if I describe it as that which is running around the backyard with a brown bushy tail and eats nuts, the better answer is a squirrel. Culturally relevant. Okay, so we're going to talk in this portion of time together about walking the gospel out into the world in ways that honor Jesus. So it's one thing to be a person who knows the gospel and has a right theology, okay? Good orthodoxy is important, absolutely. Good orthopraxy communicates good orthodoxy in a way that honors Jesus. So we can't be out there preaching the gospel in non-gospel ways. And so earlier, when you were talking about pepper, well, you were talking about salt. Did you ever talk about pepper when you were talking about salt? Okay, so that's good. But we tend to be pepper pickers. I mean, anybody here good at picking the pepper? I remember when my sister called and confronted me once that she had been reading what I had been writing, and she said, pretty much all I ever see you doing is picking pepper. Aren't you Christians supposed to be the people who are about salt? If all you're spending your time doing is picking the pepper, where is the salt? And I said, well, salt raises blood pressure. There's all kinds of warnings against salt today. So we've decided we're just going to focus on pepper. No, we are not going to just focus on pepper, okay? And when we're looking for, even sort of the spicy hot take on something, that's a pretty good indicator to us we should stay away from it, because that is probably pepper related. Okay, and so even when we're talking about culture engagement and we're talking about the platforms that we have on social media, I want us to be engaging as Christians in ways that honor Jesus. So everything that we say and every context in which we say it needs to not only be gospel, but be communicated in a way that is consistent with the gospel. Okay, so this gets to the mercy and kindness and humility parts of the conversation. Some of you have asked, where does all of this come from? And when you say all of this inspiration that I have, this sense that I have that you ought to be out there in other people's business, because it's all the business of the king, and we are all on the king's business, and so being into other people's business is a part of our role and responsibility. And then the person said, I just don't think everybody gets that. And I said, well, that's because everybody didn't grow up with a mother like mine. And everybody needs a mother like mine. And because this is the favorite page of everybody from the book, I'm going to read it to you. Okay, a portion of it. So it comes at the beginning of chapter 2. This is basically what my mother would say to my sister and I anytime there was something that clearly needed doing that it didn't look like either of us was going to do. Okay? We in our family call it the who body recitation. It went something like this. Once upon a time, there was a family of who bodies. Their names are everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. Everybody noticed something needed doing. Somebody told everybody to do it. Everybody said anybody could do it. Anybody thought it was somebody's job, and somebody left it to anybody. In the end, nobody did it. Everybody was upset because nobody did what anybody could have done, and somebody should have. My mom never had to articulate the moral, because by the end of the who body recitation, my sister and I were already silently negotiating who would be doing what anybody could do. We knew that everybody was considered a somebody in our family. We were the who bodies, and you had been put on notice. The recitation ended something like this. Everybody pays the price if nobody does what anybody could do, and somebody must. In this family, everybody is a somebody. So figure out which of the two of you is going to do it, because if nobody does it, everybody is going to wish somebody had. So that's Ruth Ann, and if you didn't have a mom like Ruth Ann, I am so sorry, because everybody should have a mom like my mom. And I think that when we consider our role and responsibility in the culture, I think that if we would embrace the reality that those of us who are women really do need to be the mothering influence in every environment and culture today, because there's just a lot of people that didn't grow up with a mom like ours, whatever that looks like. And the same is true for men. There's a lot of missing father responsibility in the culture today. There's not a lot of good modeling of what a father is like, and certainly not what a family is like. And so every time that we hear Jesus talk about his mother and his brothers being those who are doing the will of the Father, right? We ought to be getting a sense of who we are supposed to be as the people of God, as a family of faith. And what does it look like? Not just for your church to be modeling a good family life on the inside, but being the kind of family that the family of faith is, which is constantly drawing in those who are disconnected, those who are lonely, those who are widowed, those who are orphaned. I was talking with a new friend just the other day, and I call it the friend interview. I have lots of first lunches with people, and then they don't ever want to have lunch again, and so it's okay. But this one appears to be we had coffee and then lunch, so I feel like I'm making progress toward a real friendship. And she was sharing this, and it was just really heartbreaking to me. She's talking about a friend from college. This is a number of years ago. But that friend is now, a mom and living in, I think they live in Charlotte. And she's just heartbroken because this young mom, her husband died of a brain tumor. And the church was very present, right? And, during this very quick, short, brief terminal illness. And when the dad died, everybody came with the casseroles and now nothing. Now, I guess they thought she should just get over that and move on. She's young, she's got resources, she's got a job. Yes, she has 2 little kids, she's a young widow, she has a job, she needs a family. And we are it. And so, when I say get into other people's business, I am saying, don't be afraid when you read in the newspaper that there's a new young widow in your community whose husband or the father of whose children was killed on the street in a gunfight or died in a car accident on the interstate. Don't be ashamed to go and be the church for her. And don't let it end in casserole. A lot of us do a really good job for the widows and widowers in our own congregations. We know how to be the church for people that are already in the church. But we have got to learn that it's our responsibility to be the church for everybody else as well, because we are the church. And they don't know it, and they aren't in it. So we have to go get them. Okay, I want to talk about 2 things before we launch out. One is the difference between presentation and representation. Okay, so presentation and representation. Here's a couple of ways to think about that. Presentation is the kinds of sermons we all grew up with. Representation is the way Jesus preached, which was walking around in the world talking to other people about everything and bringing the perspective of God to bear upon it. Okay? So presentation is sort of, 3 points in a poem. Okay? I mean, if you went to seminary, you sort of know that there's at least that model, right? There's nothing wrong with presentation. The challenge is that the world can't hear what we're saying in this presentation model because they now live in, right? They're like, so they live in narrative-driven, visually rich, hyper-stimulated, tons of things going on the screen at the same time, and we're not even effectively, all of us, using screens, all right? And we're telling them to put their phones away in church. I am like, I don't know why, as I've been talking, nobody is putting this on Facebook Live. Like, this is good. Or on your Instagram story, or, right? And so you're saying to yourself, I don't even know what an Instagram story is. Well, it would be gone tomorrow, so even if you didn't like what I said, it's going to disappear pretty quickly, all right? But we are not wired in the same way that emerging generations are wired to be using technology in the context of any kind of experience. And so there's a reason I provide my social media down at the bottom of the page. I was actually hoping you'd be using it while we were here. No one has. I've been checking. So why bring this up this way? Because we're going to have to get to the place where the presentation happens through the platforms of others who are watching us and who are with us. Listen, hear me again. The presentation is not just accomplished in the room where it's happening. It's accomplished through the platforms, social media platforms of the people who are in the room, leveraged out there into the world through their network. And so if the one person in your church who has, I don't know, a couple thousand followers on any social media platform, that needs to be the person who you make sure is sitting like right there when you are doing some sort of presentation and you are asking them to actively leverage their platform for you. Maybe you have somebody that's like really good on Minecraft. Have you ever commissioned a missionary to Minecraft? They're out there. There are people engaged online in the Minecraft world, which, by the way, is a world for some people, and they are missionaries in that world. They build churches in Minecraft. They build mission outposts in Minecraft. You're saying to yourself, I don't even know what she's talking about. Well, there you go. This is a little learning area for all of us. Okay. Presentation is what most of us have learned how to do. Representation is what Jesus modeled. Jesus is really not a propositional apologist. He's not really arguing with atheists about a system of beliefs. He's walking around in the reality of the real world in the midst of real life with real people who have real problems, and he is bringing the kingdom of God to bear upon it. That is representation. Presentation is something that we have, as Christendom, Enlightenment era, Western educated people have really honed a skill at. But representation is what Jesus is looking for. Okay? So what does it look like to represent through representing who Christ is to the world? I think that's what we're talking about when we're talking about livable theology, when we're talking about walking the gospel out into the world that God so loves in ways that honor Jesus. I think we're talking about getting it not only into our heads, but into our hearts and out through our hands and our feet, that this is a representational model. And that's the authenticity. That's going to be the life on life. That's going to be the I am in your business and you're okay with it because I actually have some resources to bear upon it that you never even heard of. Right? People accept help when they actually think there's real help to be had. So I don't talk about propositional apologetics. I talk about conversational apologetics. And so let me encourage you to recognize that there is a work of apologetics to be done today because there is a tremendous distance between where people are living in the real world out there and what they're doing today and how they're talking and what they're talking about and how they're engaging and how they're looking at other people and how they view themselves and what they think it even means to be human. There's a tremendous distance between that cultural reality and the language and content most of us are prepared to deliver in a presentation about Jesus or a presentation about the gospel. The distance between those two things is called apologetics. And there are a lot of propositional apologetics out there, and I thank God for them. They are making the arguments, for creationism. They're making the arguments for the bodily resurrection of Christ. I'm thrilled. I'm thankful for them. I'm advocating that every Christian be prepared in the conversations of the day to help people make the connection between the eternal and what's going on in their own life. So if you're just looking for those touch points in conversation every single day to help regular people reconnect the eternal with the everyday, you can do that. You can totally do that. You may never be able to debate an atheist up on a stage in front of a bunch of other people. I can't either. But every single one of us can bring the gospel to bear in the conversations we're already having. Okay. I want to, the walk to Emmaus, by the way, is the best example of this. I mean, there's lots of examples of this in Scripture. I like to use the walk to Emmaus because it ends with eating. And I think that a lot of conversations today in the culture should include eating. Hospitality and sitting down and having a cup of coffee and breaking bread with one another. I'll just say this. My prayer every time I sit down to eat a meal with anyone, my prayer is, may Christ be made known in the breaking of this bread. So that's where the Emmaus conversation ends, right? All I want to do is help people taste and see that the Lord is good. He is ultimately going to reveal to them how it is literally all about Him. And all the scriptures that have pointed to Him, that's part of that conversation as well. But He meets them in their grief as they are walking in the world and things have really seemingly turned back. And He brings the eternal, He brings the kingdom of God to bear. And He helps them see while He's walking with them. He's going with them where they're going. You notice that whole thing never ends at church. It actually ends in another town, in a house, breaking bread, where He was invited into a conversation. He was invited into the meal. Notice that this is not a table that Jesus set. It's not a home that He owned. But there's real hospitality, right? So are you willing to go and just break bread with people and walk with them, even in their grief, and ask them what's going on, and just walk with them? That's what's going on there. All right, so that's conversational apologetics, and that's what I'm advocating, that you and I learn how to do, cultivate the ability to do, and then have that be the representational model of Christ to the world today. The book is really just an equipping in how to do that. So I want to, Marnie asked me to share a little bit from chapter 8, which is one of, okay, if I were going to rewrite this book, chapter 8 would just be the book. So, because most of the questions that people have and the things that intrigue them come out of chapter 8. So, all I'm doing in chapter 8 is taking like the beauty pageant idea and then playing with words. So I'll just tell you what they are, and as soon as I tell you what they are, you're going to be like, oh, I totally get that. Like it's not even hard to get. So I described this group of people who they're out there. You know them, and I can describe them as Miss something. And so just imagine that that we have like some pageant contestants up there, and they have little banners on. Okay, I can say this because I'm a woman. Guys probably can't as easily use this example anymore. But we start with Misnomer. Now, Misnomer, she enjoys playing with words and with friends. She knows that God has a name. She finds pleasure in name calling that reduces God to something less mysterious, less majestic, and less holy than he really is. Misnomer likes to nickname God with functions, attributes, metaphors, names that leave open the possibility that God is, well, merely a metaphor. So where God reveals himself to be love, Misnomer would have you think that we possess the liberty to pervert that truth by saying that love is God. Okay, so Misnomer, you see her active in the culture. She plays with the words. She's also really happy to like trot out little brief things on her social media where she will respond to something with OMG. If you don't know what OMG is, maybe you know what GD is. Okay? These are reductions of the holiness of the name of God and the use of the name of God in ways in the culture that are not glorifying to God. So we could go so far as to say that these are actually ways of taking the name of God in vain, but if you're going to accuse somebody of that, they would have to know what vanity is. And, that's that apologetics conversation, right? So you and I might say, oh, that's contrary to actually, one of the commandments, and people are going to be, what are you even talking about, all right? But you and I can address that someone has used the name of God, even if they've misused it. So anytime on social media or anywhere else I see OMG, or when I hear in conversation OMG, or when I hear people using the name of God in ways that God would not appreciate, I say, that is so curious to me. I didn't know you believed in God. What? Well, you said OMG, so you're addressing God as your God. Oh my God. Tell me about your faith in God. Okay, I gotta tell you, this has opened up so many conversations and so many lines because I am an eavesdropper extraordinaire. And when people are talking loud, I feel like they're inviting me in. And when they're on their phone talking loud, I super feel like they're inviting me in. So anyway, so there you go. Next up is misinformation. You can probably imagine what she's like. How about mischaracterization? Anybody out there mischaracterizing God? Any thoughts about how you could bring the gospel to bear on that? How about misunderstood? Are you aware of any ways in which God is misunderstood? Well, how does that happen? Who are the people who are the purveyors of the misinformation? And how might you encounter them in conversation? We end up with the twins, misguided and misdirected, and their disciple, misled. And then we arrive at the real zinger of the group. And this is where I want to stop for just a minute, because this is misrepresentation. And we want to talk about representation, and we want to talk about representing Christ well and representing Christ authentically. But there are those who are out there actively misrepresenting Christ. And so we want to learn to recognize and then confront misrepresentation. So I saved the nastiest for last. That's actually how page 156 begins. Misrepresentation is not what she appears to be. She is not what she purports to be. She's a wolf in sheep's clothing. She may actually be in shepherd's clothing, by the way. She is the counterfeit Christian leader about whom we have been warned. There will be false teachers among you who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the master who bought them. It's an excerpt from 2 Peter 2:1. Jude 1:4 offers a similar warning. For certain people have crept in unnoticed, ungodly people who pervert the grace of God into sensuality and deny our only Master and Lord Jesus Christ. This is a description of misrepresentation. The reason I want to highlight this is I don't want anyone to imagine for a moment that I am not aware that there is a very real battle going on for hearts and minds. So when I talk about culture being a garden, and when I talk about us being gardeners, let me tell you that in our garden, my husband has recently dispensed with a predator possum, and on Maundy Thursday, I got to crush the head of a serpent. I know, that seemed like such an interesting opportunity to be given. I also have been saying to my husband, it seems so clear to me that Adam, the Adam of the house, is always away when the serpent shows up. And the daughters of Eve seem always left to deal with the serpent. And so anyway, that's another story for another day. I know it's hard. I know it's uncomfortable. I know it's challenging. But it is the kingdom into which we are sent today as Christ's ambassadors. This is our time. This is the day of the Lord's favor. For those whom we meet, this may well be the day of salvation. And so my encouragement is to be people who know Christ, in whom Christ dwells, who are spirit motivated and empowered, and who confidently walk the faith out into the world that God so loves, as representatives, honest, authentic representatives, representing Christ to a world where he has been misrepresented, mischaracterized, misinformation spread about him, where his name is maligned. Okay, so I know there's an uphill challenge. I know that there are rocks to be removed and soil to be tilled, but there are also seeds to be planted and watered and tended. All to the point that God would be glorified and have the opportunity to have a harvest of righteousness in our generation, or the generation to come. Amen?
Amen.
Amen. So what we're going to do now is just like open sharing and Q&A. So you can either share something that emerged in your small group, or you can just ask a totally open-ended question. The floor is yours. Yes?
So when you're saying about, you're sort of disappointed that there's Facebook Live video, I'm taught that's rude. I got to keep my phone in my pocket when somebody's speaking.
Who told you that? Who told you that?
I did.
There you go. Right? So there is a responsibility, and so you're exactly right. I, as the speaker, should have given you permission at the beginning. Right? Okay. So that's good learning for all of us who are presenters. We actually need to give people permission. Okay? This will be available on YouTube. So there you go, guys. We got a friend back here recording the whole thing, and we'll post it. And I have a YouTube channel, and your Presbytery has a YouTube channel, so it'll be on YouTube, and then you can repost it on your Facebook page, and however the magic works. Okay? There you go. So thank you. Yeah. Yes?
For most of the churches in our context, the thought of going out where the Lord is already working in the culture is a terrifying thought. And we can't even help ourselves be hospitable on a Sunday morning. Much of what church looks like for us is irrelevant to the prevailing culture. So I'm curious from your perspective, similar to the attendance and the hymns, what's your top 5 hit list of things churches do to drive you crazy?
Carmen's, I've never done this before. Carmen's top 5 hit list for things that churches do that drive me crazy. One is probably verbally malign the culture. Because if somebody's verbally maligning you, you're not likely to think they want you with them. Okay? So that would be one. And that's not to say that we aren't supposed to recognize challenges in the culture that need to, places that need to be tilled or rocks that need to be removed. But maligning the culture, blaming the culture that we have created, right? That just should have fingers pointing back at us. So that's probably number one. Number 2 is not being aware that we are using a foreign language. And therefore we are putting stumbling blocks in front of people, even in our conversations out there in the culture. I mean, should they actually ever come through the door of one of our churches, I mean, I might fall over. So that's actually, I think so globally about the church. Yes, local congregations are absolutely the way that God is doing that, but God is doing it globally through a network of churches that is really extraordinarily diverse. And so I really don't live with a huge expectation that they're ever coming to the church where I attend. If they do, they're coming with me because I have invited them. And so I'm sitting next to them, and that's when, if you've ever had a first-time visitor with you in church, that's when you become incredibly aware of the Christianese in your own church, and they don't even know what a hymnal is, let alone how to turn to it and read music. I mean, they're like stymied by all of that. The Apostles' Creed, totally foreign language. I'll give you one quick Apostles' Creed story. Matthew, who is my youngest, has some very special needs. He cannot understand why the Father is sitting on Jesus' hand.
Say it, Jesus.
What does the Apostles' Creed say about where Jesus is? He is sitting on the right hand of the Father. Why is Jesus sitting on God's hand?
Sounds creepy.
This is the only place Matthew, right, he gets to this point and he's like, shut it down. So he's really probably never even heard the rest of the creed, like in terms of his mental processor, because his mind is like, Jesus is sitting on the right hand of the Father. That's so weird. Why would you sit on someone else's hand? I mean, Miss Carmen tells me all the time to sit on my hands, because my hands are busy doing things I'm not supposed to do. I can't really imagine why Jesus is sitting on the Father's right hand. Doesn't God need his hand? Don't we really want God reaching out with his right hand? Does that mean God can't reach out with his right hand anymore? You know, in the Old Testament, it's really important that God be able to reach out with his right hand. Think of all the things that God does with his right hand, and now Jesus is sitting on it. Welcome to my world. Okay. So there are some phrases that we use, or things we read, or things that we invite people to do that are really, really foreign. And so you're going to have to serve as a translator for everything if you invite someone to church. So you really want to know what the entry-level churches are in your community if you're not going to be one. If you are a church where the Lord's Prayer is recited rote, and where the Apostles' Creed is said and or recited by rote, you're not an entry-level church by any stretch of the imagination. If you sing hymns, you are not an entry-level church for cultural people. So you need to know what the entry-level churches are in your community. So who is theologically orthodox, teaching the Bible for what it really is, but an entry-level church, a 101 church. You guys are probably all 400-level churches. All right? And so we need to know what the 100-level churches are, and then we need to be willing to take our friends who are in the culture, who are just becoming interested in Jesus, we need to take them to a level 100 church, and we need to recognize it's about them being in the kingdom, not being in our church. So that's super challenging as well. The competitiveness would be the third thing. And it's really hard to engage the culture if you have a competitive Christian spirit. If you think that what you're doing in your church is, far and away so much better than what's happening in any other church, and you don't understand the John 17 vision of Christ for the church, then spend some time in John 17 before you start talking about what the church is and what God's calling it to do today. I don't know, what am I up to? 3, 4, 2 more. 3 or 4 or 5. That's probably, the other would be thinking less of ourselves than we should. Like, this would sort of be the flip side of everything I've just said, but, there's sort of like the woe is me, murmur, Eeyore. The church has like an Eeyore spirit about it sometimes. What is that about? We're the Easter people. We're the Pentecost people. We're the people in whom the Spirit of the living God dwells. We're the partners of God in his work today. We're kingdom ambassadors. This does not sound very... facing whatever challenge Park Road Church is facing today. They'll have new challenges, but they're going to look back and they're going to be like, okay, like 1,000 years ago, they moved us out of town to this place. And they're going to be like, and for 900 years we've been talking about moving a little further out. And I think today's the day. Like, right? Okay, so what you're doing today, people in the future are going to talk about. You are tomorrow's saints. There you go. Next.
So we're going to start this discussion group / pseudo Bible study for people of doubt and who are skeptics. What can I expect from them?
If you're, so let me repeat the question. We're going to start a group conversation / Bible study. I wouldn't call it that third thing. With doubters, skeptics, people who are interested and have questions about faith or themselves, people that just responded to free coffee, whatever. Friends we found on the street. We're going to have an in-gathering, and we're going to talk to folks. What should we expect? Do not expect them to be any more authentic than you are. So whatever level of authenticity and vulnerability you lead with is where they will go. And I would expect anything and everything. Nothing will be off the table for them because they're living in a culture where wide open questions are genuinely wide open and answered in a variety of ways. So, if you're open and welcoming and vulnerable and authentic and patient and really willing to respond in a non-defensive way to whatever comes up, that's what they'll be looking to sniff out, by the way. People can actually smell inauthenticity before they experience it. They can smell it. Like they can sniff it out today. So that would be, yeah. Want to add? Go ahead.
Well, just to, I was thinking about your identity politics kind of thing.
Yeah.
And people are so unwilling to talk about anything that they don't like. I don't know if you're going to have anybody show up, you know what I'm saying? Because, not that I'm just trying to discourage you, but it's almost a contradiction in our culture to talk about things that you are uncomfortable with, because it's just not being done anymore, and it's being reinforced, especially, like on college campuses and whatnot, for people not to condone talking about anything they're not comfortable with. So, this is a real challenge. That's basically what I think. I think what I said earlier when you mentioned it, Wayne, that's a brilliant idea. And it's going to be, like a bag of cats, I think. But,
That's actually my concern, is that people will come angry, ready to pick a fight with people of faith.
Well,
Okay, we have a contribution in the back, I think, to this conversation.
Why would that deter you? Capacity. Well, when people show up angry, they're looking for a chance to ventilate things that they've been denying, repressing, or feel like they can't bring up to Christians. I actually think that would be a great thing for some people to show up angry.
I don't want to get thrown out of Panera Bread Company, though.
Okay, we have a contribution up here. Yeah.
A gentle answer turns away wrath.
Yeah.
And that's, you can't prevent someone from coming in angry. You can help bring the conversation down and not ramp it up.
I also don't think you have to have an answer for everything. I mean, let's get it all out on the table, and then let's have some snacks. I mean, how surprised would they be that you didn't try to answer every question, and you didn't try to whip the Bible open and pull out the sword, like, right? I would recommend against that. And this is about the one suspicion that lingers, and it's legitimate. The one suspicion of us, of Christians, that lingers in the culture, is that we're really only interested in convincing other people of our position. We're not actually interested in people. And so if you show a genuine interest in them, they will not only come back, they will bring others. So they will become the ones who draw others in. If they really think you're interested in them, and you're interested for the long haul. Because once we start engaging in the culture with people who have layers and layers of what we would call life-controlling issues, like the Gerasene demoniac he wasn't just crazy, okay? He had layers and layers and layers of issues. Jesus dealt with those, and then it's important to recognize that Jesus circles back around to the Decapolis, and that guy has influenced a whole region that Jesus never visited. And so the people who can be affected through the kind of thing that you're talking about will have the potential to go out and be missionaries in places and spaces and to groups of people that we have no way of reaching but through them. And so I think that the general answer, I think no answer. I think, wow, that is a really substantive question, and I'm gonna have to think about that a lot. I'm glad you brought that to the table. Maybe we're gonna table that and talk about it next week or next month, or right? Well, now you have set the stage that this is a table I'm going to keep setting. I am going to be here. This table is going to be set. Jesus never ate a meal that he didn't eat with sinners. So we kind of just need to get to the place where we recognize that broken bread hospitality with broken people is in and of itself a representation of Christ to the world. And let him take care of the taste and see that the Lord is good part.
A gentle word turns away wrath.
A gentle word turns away wrath. Amen. All right, it's 2:32. We still have, at least 10 minutes. Somebody else have something? Some insight you want to share, a question you want to raise, or you just want to go ahead and get on the road? Because I'm not obsessed about being here to a certain point in time. I want you to feel like you got your money's worth, though, right? They hauled me up here from Nashville, so. Yes?
Can you just speak some more on dropping Christianese? That's all.
Yes.
Abandoning this language, it seems to be more of a hurdle than we realize, or want to admit.
Yeah, so Christianese is something that is language that is so second nature to us as Christians, we don't even hear it anymore. And it's literally foreign language to other people. So if you have ever done any cross-cultural ministry, you recognize the hurdle of language, right? We have a person who could speak to this actually in a foreign language, and then we'd all be informed about just how challenging this is, right? So if I go to a place that is literally speaking a foreign language, I immediately put up a wall because I don't feel safe. I don't know if they're talking. Okay, you probably don't go get your nails done. But if you did, you would be in environments where other people are speaking a foreign language and they're laughing amongst themselves, and you're constantly thinking, are they talking about me? Are my feet that bad? Are my toes gross? So I am in an environment where everyone is speaking a language that is not my own. And instead of feeling like it's a place where I can engage and talk, I'm more and more isolated, and I become self-conscious and self-aware. Okay, that's what happens when we're talking our Christianese language, and other people are standing there. They don't even know. We refer to the lost. They're pretty sure that's them. Reference to pagans, probably not super helpful. I use this language all the time, so I'm aware of this. When we talk about things words like justification or sanctification, or even heaven and hell, the culture is actually interested in death, super duper interested in death, and fascinated by it. And so why aren't we just taking what culture is giving us and using that language instead of feeling like, oh, but I know a multi-syllabic word that stands for that, and so instead I'm going to use that. Right? So just because you know what the Greek says, or the 4-syllable word, you could just say the word that the culture is using, and that would be okay. All right? So I think that part of it is our recognizing that we are ambassadors in a foreign culture and using the language of the culture to talk about the things of the faith. The challenge is when 2 or more of us are gathered together, we slide right back into the kingdom chat, right? So kingdom chat is fine here because we're all Christians. But when we're together out there in the culture, like, don't be sitting at the same Panera where you're going to have your skeptics and doubters group talking with another pastor about the lost. Because the doubter and skeptic is probably still there in the next next booth. Pews. Who sits in pews anymore? Come sit with me in my pew. What? Where is that language in the world? Where is this set up in the world other than in the church? I mean, have you been to the theater lately?
Reclining seats.
Do you schedule, like, right? I choose my own seat in advance, way better than the airplane. It's wide, it's luxurious, it lays all the way out flat. They bring me drinks, like, right? That's crazy. This is what people think that they're getting in theater seating. So even if you already have theater seating, I guarantee you don't have theater seating. And this is not theater seating, right? And I'm not saying that we all have to change the architecture of our buildings, or we all have to change the way, our furnishings are designed, or how they're, but just know that a person from the culture this is completely foreign to them. This is like you showing up somewhere, and what has been provided to you is one of those little plastic child chairs. Because that's what they're doing where they're doing it. They're doing tiny plastic child chairs. We're doing pews. This is just as uncomfortable to them. We're asking people to sit next to people they've never met, touch people they've never met, sing. Where else in the culture are people invited? Where else in the culture are people invited to stand up and sing?
Football game.
The 7th inning, right? Okay. So it's pretty limited. It's a pretty limited list of things.
But why is that so bad?
It's not bad. Oh, there's nothing bad about it. We just need to recognize that it's a completely different culture. And that's why I use the embassy language. People need to know they're coming into a completely foreign culture when they come into a church. So when we invite people to church, we need to remember that. We need to remember that we are inviting a foreigner into an embassy of a different kingdom, and that everything here is going to be unusual to them. And so it's the conversation that we have with the person that we invited. Well, have you ever actually, now I'm just curious, have you ever been to church before? Come on in. Okay, now, this is a fun group. What are you guys doing here? You're way more fun than us. Yeah, if you have social media, you should click it on right now. Instagram, Facebook, because nobody else is doing that, and I find it sad. You can teach us. Maybe they're just collecting things. Get it right. Okay. We'll stop embarrassing them. Okay. So it's not that anything that we're doing is bad. It's that everything that we're doing is foreign. And so a lot of us didn't have, we didn't go through the training that foreign service officers go through before we send them overseas. But that's the kind of training we need today. Because we now have these embassies, our churches and our homes, I would argue. Your home is an embassy of the kingdom of heaven in your neighborhood, on your street. When people come to your home, my guess is there are different practices and customs happening in your home, different languages spoken, than is happening in the house to the right and the left of you. So when people are invited into your home for Christian hospitality, it should be a different experience. It should be distinctly Christian, and they should sort of be warned of that in advance. So it's not, forgive me if I have used language that suggests that it's bad. There are some ways I think we can prepare them, and there are some places and ways that I think we can change what we're doing to make the experience of coming in more welcoming and less off-putting. But I'm not suggesting that we give up any of it. Some of it needs to be adjusted. Some of it they simply need to be prepared for before they arrive. Or we need to take them to an entry-level church, which is why I also suggested we all need to know the entry-level churches in our communities. Entry-level churches do not have fixed furniture. They do not have spaces that look like this. They do not sing from hymn books. The entry-level churches are not doing any of that.
How do we learn the language they are using? Meaning the people we're trying to engage. I mean, because it's a totally different,
Okay,
it's
so
English, but it's not English.
So I'm going to send you out to do a little research.
Okay.
And you're going to go to, there's probably a coffee shop of some kind in your town where younger people probably hang out at weird hours when you think coffee should not be consumed.
No. 24/7.
You're like, are they really drinking coffee? Okay. So I want you to go there, and I want you to just take a notepad. And I just want you to sit and listen. And I want you to just write down words that surprise you, or words you don't know the meaning of. And you're just going out as this is literally just a cultural exercise in listening. And the other thing would be become a student of next generation people. And for me, it's not just next generation. There are now multiple generations to whom I need to be listening. If I am going to actually learn what they're talking about and how they're talking about it. So, I would say talk to some of your colleagues who are engaged with Gen Z, like with people that are in high school and elementary school. Talk with some of your colleagues who are engaged in those and say, where could I be overhearing the language of that generation? And they're probably going to send you to a particular YouTube site, YouTubers that are followed by that age group, and those kinds of things. And you just go and listen. Music is another big place where you can learn the language of the current culture. Much of it will be deeply offensive. Okay? I live in Nashville, so we just hosted the NFL draft. I have no idea why 500,000 people needed to come to my town to watch something that you could sit at home and watch on television. They stood in the street. The whole thing just boggles my mind. Anyway, I digress. What are we doing as the church in America that would attract 500,000 people to stand in the street for 4 days and scream their fool heads off and wait for the one thing that was going to be said that was relevant to them? We're not doing anything that's that attractional. But one thing happened in the midst of the NFL draft that was like, what does that even have to do with any of this? Well, it didn't have anything to do with the NFL draft, but it was a really good opportunity to capitalize on the fact that 500,000 people were standing right there, and 10 million were watching on television. Again, for what purpose? Anyway. If I say that the announcement was of a song entitled Me, who would know what I'm talking about? Okay, what am I talking about? Taylor Swift totally capitalized on the NFL draft and the fact it was in her town to do the big reveal on this song and then this album called Me. Now, I don't know about you, but I couldn't sing about me for a whole song nor for a full album. So I feel like there's a sermon, that'll preach. But the fact that there's this massive piece of artwork that had been commissioned by the NFL that the day before the draft, this one word with an exclamation point was added right to the middle of it. Well, guess what the word was? Me. She had the whole place wondering and talking, and millions of people on Instagram. How many people of the Instagram generation were watching the NFL draft before they got whiff of the idea that Taylor Swift might be sharing her new song at this event? I'm just saying, like, there are places that we could be listening and watching for what's happening in the culture, and it's being driven into our living rooms if we're paying attention. Culture is giving us what we need. We just have to pay attention to it. So, can you talk about me and the me, and what it means to be me? Sure, that'll preach, right? It's actually not all about me, come to find out. So, I don't know if that answers your question, but I tried. All right, it is now officially 2:46. So if we want to leave at 2:50, we should pray now. Yes? Okay, everybody should stand up. Am I allowed to close the meeting, or does that have to happen by somebody more official than me? Okay.
You're official
All
enough.
right, here we go. Please stop by the building over here and get a snack on your way out, because there's a lot of food, and it all travels well. Is that good? Cookies and drinks and, yes? Cake. Those little cheesecake things, are they still over there? All right, what we're going to do now is we are going to receive the commissioning of the Holy Spirit as ambassadors of Jesus Christ. We're going to be deployed into the world that God so loves to bring to bear the principles of the kingdom of heaven into the kingdoms of this world. Amen?
Amen.
Holy God, what a joy it is to know you. What a joy it is to be reconciled to you in Jesus Christ. What a joy it is to be filled with your Holy Spirit. What a joy it is to be invited to labor with you in the midst of this generation, in this time, on this day, the day of your favor, the day of salvation for some who do not yet know. What a joy. Father, thank you for inviting us into this work. Thank you for sending us forth as ambassadors of your kingdom with your full authority, all authority in heaven and on earth, given to Christ and then given to us, empowered by the Holy Spirit to actually bring your kingdom principles to bear on earth as they are already lived out in heaven. Father, what a joy. Send us forth from this place with a right and righteous understanding of ourselves as ambassadors of your kingdom, ministers of reconciliation, agents of grace. And Father, give us your eyes, your worldview on this world that you so love, that we might be counted among those who tended it well in our generation, and that it produced a harvest of righteousness to your glory. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.